The meeting. Please have a seat. In opening the meeting, I note that all councillors are present. The City of Launceston acknowledges the Tasmanian Aboriginal people as the traditional custodians of this land. We pay respect to elders, past, present and future, as they hold the memories, the traditions, the cultures and hopes for generations to come. We recognise and value Aboriginal histories, knowledge and lived experiences, and we commit to being culturally inclusive and respectful in our working relationships with Aboriginal people. A reminder to everyone present that mobile telephones should be switched to silent, and also that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded. Item 3, declarations of interest. In accordance with Regulation 8 of the Local Government Meeting Procedures Regulations of 2015, elected members are requested to indicate whether they may have any pecuniary or conflict of interest in respect to any matter appearing on today's agenda. Are there any such declarations? There being none, let's move to item 4. Confirmation of minutes, that the minutes of the ordinary meeting of the City of Launceston held on the 23rd of March be confirmed as a true and correct record. Someone to move. Thank you, Councillor Harris. A seconder, Councillor Palmer. All those in favour raise their hand. That is all councillors present. The motion is carried. Item 5, council workshops, referring to the workshops held on the 23rd and the 30th of March. Someone to move. Thank you, Councillor Dawkins. A seconder, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Dawkins, do you wish to speak to the item? Deputy Mayor, do you wish to speak to the item?
Just quickly, Mayor. Just to speak to a couple of the workshops in particular, that how encouraging it was to see that our waste charges and waste rate for the City of Launceston are among, if not the lowest in the state, and how this council has a vision for the future and it is looking at options beyond landfill. That was quite encouraging. And also looking at the planning scheme and professional development, I thank you, Mayor, and the team for continuing to put an emphasis on a way that us as councillors can continue to learn. It's been heavily publicised recently regarding the councillors' general feeling of our hands are tied due to the planning scheme. So I think it's a credit to the current council here who aren't afraid to ask questions and voice concerns around these issues, but more so that we are active in our professional development by taking these concerns into workshop. And so thank you once again to that initiative for ensuring that we are continually scheduled and that we can best educate ourselves to the process and find the best way that we can still be a progressive council, we can still see developments, but we can also do that without the detriment to our community.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Are there any other speakers to 5.1? Councillor Dawkins, do you wish to close? All those in favour raise their hand. That is all councillors present. The motion is carried unanimously. Item 7, community reports. Today we welcome Katie and Stephen from the Wilderness Society of Tasmania to provide us with an update on the important work that you do. A big welcome.
Thank you very much, Mayor and councillors, for this opportunity to explain what we do. I'm Steve Saunders and I'm a volunteer and member of the Management Committee of the Wilderness Society, based here in Launceston at 174 Charles Street, opposite Princes Square. Our office at 174 Charles Street was the very first Tasmanian Wilderness office, and I say Tasmanian Wilderness Society because that's what we were then. It was bought by Bob Brown and a bunch of the other people from the protest days on the Franklin in August 1987. A little later, the Hobart office was purchased. We're very proud of the fact we were first. A few years later, the Tasmanian Wilderness Society spread to all states and was renamed to the Wilderness Society. Or TWIS, as we fondly call it these days. It's easier to say. Thousands of people have joined our group's supporters, and we're fortunate enough to still have some of those original members that founded who bought that office and banded together in our community today, still alive and active and supporting us. The Wilderness Society's stated purpose is to protect, promote and restore wilderness, and we now also recognise Aboriginal nations as custodians of country and their inseparable connection to the natural environment. In the early days, our office organised street protests against wood chipping of our native forest and anti-pulp mill campaigns. TWIS still continues that work, but now we work more in the courts and corporate boardrooms to achieve those goals. We've succeeded in protecting millions of hectares of high conservation wilderness around Australia. The Charles Street office continues to be a vibrant place for our work as we organise campaigns, wilderness walks and film nights. As well, our office provides a meeting place for high school students, naturalists and community groups of all types. Our campaign office in Charles Street is a place that celebrates our natural heritage and has become part of the cultural heritage of Launceston and Tasmania. Thank you. Katie?
Hi, I'm Katie, the new office coordinator for the Launceston Campaign Centre. Our organisation has many ongoing campaigns, and the most relevant for me to explain today is the Community Rights in Environmental Decision Making campaign. So research shows that decisions made with and by communities result in better outcomes for communities and the environment. Australia's current failure to properly ensure a consistent and fair approach to community participation in environmental decision making is leaving a legacy that is harming communities, driving a wildlife extinction crisis, and allowing the destruction and degradation of Australia's globally iconic land and sea country. On that note, we also commend the Council on introducing its first urban greening strategy and consulting the community on this process. Another campaign we are passionate about is the Cooperuna or so-called Great Western Tiers campaign, which highlights the opportunity to create the first substantial new national park in Tasmania in about 30 years. The Cooperuna region is considered highly significant to the Palawa people. The campaign's main goal is for the Cooperuna to become Lutruwita, Tasmania's first Aboriginal returned, owned and managed national park. We are running guided walks in this region in support of this campaign, which you will find in your printed material. Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak about the Wilderness Society's contributions.
Great, thanks Katie, thanks Stephen, and thanks for leaving the information and save the date flyer with us as well. That's appreciated. Item 8, public question time, 8.1. 8.1.1, facilities at Launceston Leisure and Aquatic Centre. 8.1.2, delegated authorities, specifically the Launceston Waste Centre and City Greening. 8.1.3, the Tamer Bicycle Users Group question on cycling infrastructure. 8.2, public questions without notice. Are there any questions without notice? I'll ask Elizabeth to read the guidelines. Thank you.
If you are participating in public question time, please move to the microphone and state your name and address. You may then ask up to 3 questions. Please direct your questions to the Mayor. The Mayor may refuse to accept a question. If this happens, reasons will be provided. If your questions are accepted, they will either be answered at this meeting or taken on notice and answered at a future council meeting. Debate or discussion about questions or answers is not permitted.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Mr Baines, welcome to you.
Thank you. Ron Baines, Kings Meadows. I have 3 questions. Is one reason for the refurbishment of the Albert Hall to enable UTIS to utilise this facility?
Thanks, Mr Baines, for the question. Can categorically say no, that's not the case.
Thank you. Apparently the ward system, which was in place some years ago, worked quite well. Is there any valid reason why this system could not be reinstated to benefit ratepayers and residents, apart from maybe inconvenience for councillors?
Thanks, Mr Baines, for the question. As you might be aware, we're awaiting the imminent arrival of the report into the review of local government in Tasmania. And so one such example of representation featuring wards could be included in that report. We're expecting to see that any day or so.
Thank you. When in-house experts are not available, I understand council consults with experts in a given field. So please consider this. UTIS transport expert and academic Bob Colgrave said, and I quote, "Cars in a Launceston context are irreplaceable and more restrictive parking will strangle the CBD. More unobtrusive and attractive parking would be beneficial, end of quote. Yet, this council is pursuing a policy of pedestrianisation in direct opposition to a stated expert on this subject. Why?
Thank you, Mr. Bain, for the question and for your view included in the question. I might ask General Manager Shane to start by responding to that.
So I think, so council's strategic direction in the CBD is really reflected in the.
Sorry, I can't hear you. Could you use the microphone? I've got a hearing problem.
No worries.
I'm deaf.
The council's direction in terms of traffic and parking in the CBD is primarily set by the Launceston City Heart Master Plan. And I think it's incorrect to say that we're removing parking from the city. I must say that the principles of the strategy are about providing more equitable space for pedestrians, because it's pedestrians that spend money in shops, not people in cars. So it's trying to balance the need for people to get into the city and through the city versus the need to support pedestrianisation of the city. So more than happy to catch up with yourself and the university expert to further discuss if you like.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. Maybe free parking for electric vehicles would be good too. Bye.
Thank you, Mr. Baines. Ros Ives, welcome.
Thank you. My name's Rosalind Ives and I live at 61 Connaught Crescent, West Launceston. I've got two questions today. The first is about the chairlift at the Cataract Gorge refurbishment. And the question just follows the item in the last agenda, which was from the workshop on the 16th of March about the plan for refurbishment of the Cataract Gorge chairlift. Our Launceston community considers the Cataract Gorge as our special place. We all do. This was underscored with the previous proposal for a cable car, which was rejected by council. For all members of the community to walk together in support of the chairlift refurbishment, the changes that may or may not be proposed to council for council consent would more likely be fully supported by the community if presented to the public well before a DA is proposed. It would serve both the proponents and the council's interest to garner public support before a DA is presented to council. Would council consider the advantage of speaking to the public about the proposal and its detail as part of the process before the DA is formulated?
Thank you for the question and early advice of the question. CEO.
Yes, no, I echo the thanks for the early advice of the question. So the response we've got to that is, so the owners of the Cataract Gorge chairlift have advised the council that due to the age of the asset, there is a pressing need for refurbishment works to occur. The owners have recently completed some early engagement work with the council to outline the proposed refurbishment works. At this stage, it's still very early in the process and there's significant amount of consultation, investigation, the studies and the design that will need to occur. The council is certainly able to recommend to the owner that they undertake a community engagement process once they've advanced the proposal to a sufficient stage. And I spoke with the owner's representative this morning and they're open to that suggestion.
Fantastic, thank you. We need to have positive energy. Okay. The second question is about meeting place for events for volunteers and small organisations. And this follows the recent motion passed about the barracks building being considered for public use, and it's such a timely one. Cultural, social and charitable organisations are a major contributor to Launceston's spirit of connecting and exciting involvement by community members. However, there is a problem for many groups meeting and presenting events after 5 p.m. because many of these groups, such as the Book Council, poetry groups, etc., function on very meagre budgets without sponsorship and in the interest of being inclusive to all, don't wish to charge entrance fees to cover higher charges of halls, etc. They have only the option then of pubs to meet and hold functions. To encourage attendance numbers, a central location is always a preference. Macquarie House is underutilised and the hiring fees are beyond the budgets of many small voluntary organisations, clubs and associations. The barracks building would be a perfect answer to this need. Would Council consider, when making a decision about this space, that a hiring service for groups to meet and hold functions there is an acute need and would further Council's goals of building an inclusive and culturally diverse society?
Thanks, Ros, and thanks for your work in that important community space. CEO, perhaps to outline where we're at with that.
Yeah, thanks very much for the question. So the Department of Defence has identified that it intends to divest the barracks building once suitable arrangements are in place for its reservists and cadet activities. So this is not expected to occur until 25-26 at the earliest. So throughout this year, the City of Launceston will undertake a pre-feasibility study exploring the risks and opportunities involved in the potential acquisition of the site. And as part of this process, we will consider future opportunities for the site using input from community groups, event organisers, business stakeholders and more. So the Council has already received expressions of interest from community groups to use the barracks for meetings, functions and the like, and therefore this use will certainly be considered as part of this process.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Rosemary Armitage, MLC, Member for Launceston.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And I have provided prior notice to the CEO for the first part of my question. So in a question I asked in Parliament with regard to heavy vehicle bypass or ring road, it was what progress has been made towards construction of a bypass or any other traffic solution as a result of the Transport Vision project between the Tasmanian Government and the Greater Launceston Councils. Now, the answer that was given, the proposal for a new bypass is not aligned with the relevant development strategies, in particular those of the City of Launceston, regarding sustainable economic development, improved livability and land use planning. So can you please advise the Council's view regarding a bypass, whether it is still being considered by Council, and whether it is or is not aligned with the Council's development strategies as detailed above, and what could be done to improve or rectify the situation? That's my first part of my question.
Thank you. And again, do you want to ask the next one, Rosemary, and then we'll provide the responses?
Well, I can, but I just would have liked an answer first because the second one, I don't really want it to get lost. But as per the Launceston Eastern Bypass Feasibility Study by Pett and Sherry, dated 26th of March 2022, can you please advise with regard to the conclusion, which was on page 39, and I know obviously have a copy, and it said a further study is warranted to investigate options of locating the primary freight handling facility to outside of central Launceston. And my question is, has this study been commenced? And have discussions taken place, or are they taking place with the primary freight handling facility to relocate outside of central Launceston?
Great. Thank you. CEO.
Thanks for the question, Rosemary, and thanks for the prior warning, and apologies that we've got a long response for you. So the Greater Launceston Plan proposed the development of the Launceston Connector route to provide a bypass and connector road function around Launceston's inner and middle suburbs. So the proposed route comprised the proposed eastern bypass route to run from Mackenzie Street at Mowbray Link Road, southeast through Heritage Forest and along the northeast valley to Johnson Street in St Leonard's. So the southeast bypass concept was subjected to a feasibility study by the Department of State Growth in 2022, which is what you're referring to. That study examined the feasibility of building a bypass between East Tamar and the Midlands Highway aimed at reducing congestion in the city centre by diverting freight traffic away from the city centre. It looked at several options, including between the Mowbray connector on the East Tamar Highway and Hobblers Bridge Road, and from St Leonard's Road, crossing the North Esk floodplain using Johnson's Road, and a new section to the west of the rail corridor, which with two further options to be connected to the Midlands Highway. So the study found a bypass would not deliver significant improvements to traffic congestion, economic development and livability. The cost-benefit analysis rated the major bypass options as having weak economic benefits. Traffic modelling showed the bypass would not significantly improve travel times, and was not an attractive option for longer distance trips compared to the existing route between East Tamar and Midlands Highway. It would mostly benefit local traffic. The study also indicated that there would not be any significant improvement to active transport or a reduction in traffic incidents, and identified a potential increase in flood risk to the riverside of the bypass. So based on the findings above, the study recommended that none of the bypass options warranted progression to stage 2 of the feasibility assessment, and that a further study is warranted to investigate options of locating a primary freight handling facility to the outside of central Launceston. So based largely on the feasibility study, the Eastern Bypass is not included in the Council's current Launceston transport strategy. However, the Council is currently working with the Department of State Growth and stakeholders to progress the study into the freight handling facilities, which does have the potential to improve the situation.
Great, thank you, CEO.
Can I just have
An additional question?
An additional question with regard to that. So do we have a time frame? And I do appreciate that it was probably what I'd actually read in the study with respect, Mr Stratton, but if I could have a time frame, if there is a time frame for that further study?
We'll take that on notice. Was there also an additional question with regard to FOGO?
No, that was answered previously by Mr Stratton in an email.
Okay, thank you. The next person to ask a question is Raphael. Would you like to come to the microphone? Hi.
Thank you, Mayor. Hello. Rafael Molina from number 6 Maitland Street, Launceston. I'm speaking on behalf of the Tamar Bicycle Users Group. Thank you for answering my question at the previous meeting, Mayor. I have another question regarding infrastructure. What type of cycling infrastructure is the City of Launceston considering to build or improve in order to make the City of Launceston more attractive for cycling as a transport option?
Thank you for the question, and certainly appreciate the work of T-Bug. We'll provide a detailed response to that for you and members and the general public. Take that on notice.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions without notice? There being none, let's move to item 9 of the agenda. Under the provisions of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act of 1993, Council acts as a planning authority in regards to items included in today's agenda. Item 9, Planning Authority. Elizabeth, wonder if you'd read the guidelines, please.
If you are speaking to an item on today's agenda, the Mayor will invite you to come forward to the microphone. Please state your name and address. You may speak for up to 2 minutes, either for or against the recommendation. You will hear this sound when you have reached your time limit. You may not ask questions or enter into debate with councillors or council officers. Your statement is not to be defamatory, inappropriate or abusive, or be intended to embarrass any person. The Mayor may direct you to stop speaking if you do not follow these rules or if your statement repeats points that have already been made.
Wonderful. Thank you, Elizabeth. The first item to be considered is 9.1, DA 0580 2022, 112 Tamar Street, Launceston, residential construction of 2 dwellings. We do have a number of speakers. The first speaker, please, is Stephen. Would you like to come to the microphone?
Hello, my name's Stephen Fone. I've got dwelling at 5 to 7 York Street, which backs on with the lower side of 112 Tamar Street. I'm speaking for myself and also Christine Philpott. There's 2 main concerns that I have. Firstly, just the size and proportions, the height and the overlook of the proposed apartments has. My place is approximately 3 stories high. The new dwellings proposed, they actually look over the top of our place, so that makes them equivalent of 5 stories high. So if you stood up the top of this building and look down to the street, that is the overlook it has on the back of our property. So not only all the back windows, but nearly the whole area. There currently is parking spots, but eventually when it comes time for me to retire, we're putting the building back to semi-detached, and those back areas will be turning into courtyards. A huge concern for me is that the place was built in 1840. You'll see, I've given a couple of photos, you'll see the picture of the walls. These walls were built in 1840. They were built by convict labour. These are not retaining walls. These were built as facing walls. Behind those facing walls is reactive clay. Reactive clay is like sandstone until water is added. Then it comes down to a very, very fine silt. You will see in that photo that there's two containers holding up the middle section. There's three sections, the left, the middle and the right. The middle section, there was a water escape from 112 Tamar. That water didn't run above ground, it ran underground to the bottom of the wall. That wall had been there for nearly 180 years, but after that water escaped, the wall started to rotate.
Can I just clarify, you're also taking the 2 minutes? Oh, yeah, fine. Thank you.
They started to rotate. We quickly had to put the containers in front. We had to dig huge foundations in front of the containers, which the engineer designed. When we did those 1.6 metre deep foundations, we did it with a vacuum truck because you couldn't afford to have vibration because those walls, once again, are facing walls. They've been there for 180 years. My main concern is that this is unusual because there's been a proposal for 2 townhouses. I like the townhouses. I don't think they're quite appropriate for the area. However, the difficulty is with all the vibration on top of there, once they take the topsoil off, I know, because I've dug 50 tonnes of it by hand behind these walls, that this reactive clay cracks. When that top layer comes off, the water goes into the cracks behind the walls. Peter Spratt's engineering report, who's a heritage engineer, the worst problem for these walls is vibration and also the water and the silt getting behind these walls. So there's a huge safety concern, not only for my property, but for my neighbouring property. You all may have seen what happened to the end neighbour when the water came off 112 Tamar down Bennell's Way in behind that wall. That wall nearly killed my neighbour. Luckily, he was sitting in his chair on a tile floor because when his wall came down, it pushed him across the room. If it had been carpet, he potentially could have been killed. So I know this is unusual, but when and if this building takes place, that we have to look at either making these facing walls. Can I just have 15 more seconds?
Finish your sentence.
At the moment, the containers are sitting there. I've excavated behind that middle section. I'm pushing the walls back. Once they're pushed back, no fine concrete's going in behind. We're changing that facing wall, that middle facing wall, into a retaining wall with the help of engineers.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We appreciate you being with us. The next speaker I have listed is Bev. Welcome.
Thank you. Bev Newton, Unit 2, 12 Mestre Court, St Leonards, speaking on behalf of the owner of 2 Wellman Street. Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, councillors. Concerning the development application before you this afternoon for 112 Tamar Street, I note the planner's recommendation is for approval, despite the significant and substantial overshadowing impacts to 2 Wellman Street. On page 28 of the report, the planner states, and I quote, that the shadow does not extend to habitable windows of 2 Wellman Street. Now, consider the shadow diagrams from page 60 that were publicly advertised and are before you for endorsement this afternoon. The plans do not show what the shadowing impacts will be to the windows of 2 Wellman Street. As a planning authority determining this application, you are required to be satisfied, based on the plans before you, the development will not pose an unreasonable loss of amenity to adjoining properties. To ascertain this, you need to have regard to the overshadowing to habitable room windows. As you do not have plans that clearly demonstrate this, You cannot beyond reasonable doubt determine what the level of impact is. As this application fails to demonstrate this, and with a maximum height of 13.5 metres, 5 metres beyond the acceptable maximum height, the correct and logical decision is to refuse the application. Thank you.
Thanks, Bev. Thanks for joining us today. The next speaker I have listed is Malcolm. Mal.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My name's Malcolm Philpott. I live at number 3 York Street, adjacent to Stephen, and our property backs on to 112 Tamer Street. I refer to concern number 1 in our submission to Council, which you've probably already seen. This relates to Performance Standard 842 of the siting and scale of a dwelling must not cause unreasonable loss of amenity to adjoining properties. This is probably the worst example I've ever seen. The substantial scale, bulk and proportions of the 2 dwellings is not in question. It's mentioned in the decision statement and confirmed emphatically when viewing the supplied plans. The dwellings do not fit within the prescribed building envelope, also confirmed in the supplied plans, in the decision statement. When both of these conditions exist, the proposal does not comply with the Tasmanian State Planning Scheme. Simple, and must be rejected. However, page 34 of the council meeting agenda, on your council meeting agenda, the planning scheme assessment states the proposal complies, and the reason given is that an existing stone wall at the rear of the York Street properties mitigate the visual impact. Now, this is simply not the case. The proposal is for townhouse number 1 to be constructed not behind the wall, but above and very close to the top of it. To state the wall facing the bank on our rear property in any way mitigates the adverse impact is false and misleading. The wall in question sits below, not in front of the proposed building, and can make no difference one way or the other to the building's adverse impact on the properties beneath it. The planning scheme assessment implies that the building, at a massive 17 metres above our ground floor level, is somehow less intrusive than a building 13 metres above it. This is simply ridiculous. In conclusion, the reasoning behind number 4 at the bottom of page 34 of your agenda is false and misleading, cannot and should not be relied upon to overturn the state planning scheme. This planning scheme assessment contains a number of interpretations, assumptions and findings that all favour the proponent.
Thank you, Mal.
It would be remiss of all councillors on behalf of their ratepayers to not ask the city manager one simple question. Why?
Thank you. That is your time. Thanks for being with us. The next speaker is George.
Dear Mayor and Councillors, the application is for the construction of 2 dwellings on the site. The site is constrained by slope and the presence of a significant bluestone retaining wall, which is located on the adjoining York Street properties to the north. Significant effort has been made by the owners and the design team to ensure the proposed dwellings are designed to manage these constraints, along with addressing the applicable standards of the Tasmanian Planning Scheme. With respect to some of the key concerns raised within the representations, we note, for privacy, the site characteristics and building design will result in the northwestern lower level balconies being equal to or above the roof level of the adjoining dwellings to the north on York Street, which will minimise direct views to habitable rooms and private open space of these dwellings. There's a further condition requiring a screen onto these balconies that are within 3 metres of the boundary. Visual scale and bulk. The buildings have been designed so that each level steps away from the northern boundary, which will reduce its apparent scale and bulk when viewed from the adjoining properties, coupled with the fact that the ground floor open space of the adjoining dwellings is below the bluestone retaining wall. The building will also be compatible with the graduation of existing development within the surrounding area as development transitions from the flats of the CBD up to the eastern hillside of Launceston. Heritage. The site is not listed as a heritage place on the local or state listings. There's been ample opportunity for Council to include the site on the local heritage register since it was listed in the heritage study of 2006. It is not. Impact on the bluestone retaining wall. The bluestone wall located below the site on the adjoining York Street properties is at the forefront of the designer's mind with regards to how the construction of the buildings will be managed. In this regard, subject to receiving planning approval, further geotechnical and structural engineering investigations will be conducted on the site. and around the wall to determine the best structural design and construction method to minimise the impacts on the wall. This is a mandatory requirement of the building application process. We therefore seek Council support of approval for the application in accordance with the recommendation before you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, George. Thanks for being with us. And next on my list was Christine, and of course Christine had Stephen speak for her. Are there any additional speakers for 9.1? Thank you. There being none, someone to move. Councillor Mackenzie has moved, as is Councillor Mackenzie. Thank you. Councillor Harris has seconded the motion. Councillor Mackenzie.
Thanks, Mayor, and thank you for the conversation that everybody's provided, both in written form and today at the meeting. I think it's all very valuable. I guess, as I always say, the reasons they get here is because these are not easy, these decisions, and there are lots of reasons why they're not easy. There's a changing landscape in Launceston and things that people want to build that probably a lot of people say, well, we bought and we did what we did based on what was there. I must admit I came in and I was fairly confident that this was going to meet my test, and until I was visiting Mr Philpott this morning, I was quite convinced that there was an issue that I was quite comfortable with. So, and again, I'm interested to hear what other people say today. I guess there's a few things that have emanated through the representations that have been put forward. One was demolition of the house. That's not a decision we're making here today. That's already been made, so it's not something that we can concern ourselves in relation to today. Heritage versus modern. Again, we've got a building which is not heritage listed but fits in within the streetscape, perhaps a little more so than the current one does at this point in time. The reality of it is when you're going to demolish a house and build something else, to replace it with faux heritage is probably not going to make a better outcome than a modern building. So whatever's going to be built on that building is not going to fit in with the buildings that are around it. So we need to take that into context in dealing with it. And I guess I always have this issue about design. What somebody loves, somebody else hates. And if I have a discussion with my wife, we regularly disagree about what looks good and what doesn't look good. So I appreciate that what I might view as being a lovely design might not suit what everybody else says. Visual bulk. No, sorry, I'll go back. The wall first. Again, I think that's been addressed by 60 Degrees in their commentary as well, but I think the important aspect of the wall in front is that it is not part of the planning approval, it's part of the building issues associated with the building. I appreciate the real concerns based on what happened at number 1, York Street a few years ago. That is a real concern, the back walls in relation to that. However, that's something that needs to be dealt with in the building design phase of the building, and I hope that the builders will take conversations with the neighbours to ensure that we get the best outcomes in relation to those things should the application be approved today. Visual bulk and building envelope, certainly something that it is big, because it's 2 buildings for a start on a building which is set back from the site and a large vacant block to the west of the site as well. So we're now building on the whole of the block, which is what people do these days. They don't tend to like to have gardens. They like to have buildings that take over the buildings, and their public-private open space is largely taken up by the buildings and the decks and things that they have within. That's just the way the world is, and I guess when you've got City Park just down the road, it's probably not a bad backyard for you to go and play in if you need to do so. So that's a choice that people make. I think commentary in regard to water retention, I understand under the Planning Act that all water and coming off surfaces need to be captured on site. So my argument probably is in relation to the current water issues. Water can run freely based on the way the building is there at the moment. Any future development under the planning scheme needs to retain that water and take it away. So therefore, in relation to these buildings, the water will be captured and therefore probably be a better result for the neighbours, that it won't be running downhill like it currently does off the property. So that is something I understand under the scheme we need to do. I guess the real issue that comes back to me is in regards to amenity. A conversation I often raise at these times is, what does amenity look like? And the planning scheme seems to have a varied view on what amenity looks like, that we can't say that I got that view out there today and said, I'm putting a building up in front of it. You don't own the view. The reality of it is, we need to be manage the view. And I was in Mr. Philpott's house this morning looking, and they've got a beautiful gazebo, which is light outside, and their view is up. And their view is that this building is actually going to take out a large bit of the sky that's above them because of the visual vault on the back of it. Now, to some extent, the existing building that's there, which terraces back a little bit, already does take some of that out. There's no doubt this is a bigger building and it's got more bulk associated with it, and therefore it will take more of that skyline out. The reality of it is that in relation to amenity, sufficient to suggest that this planning application should be refused. That's something we'll need to consider as we go through. To me, the fact that we're outside the building envelope, most of that is on the sides.
Do you require an extension?
For a change, I do.
Yes. Someone to move? Councillor Walker. And a seconder, Councillor Dawkins. All those in favour raise their hand. All councillors present. The extension is granted.
So I guess until I stood there today, I didn't really feel the need to think that that was a big issue. It's certainly a bigger issue than I first considered. I'm still waxing and waning as to whether it's a big enough issue to knock this development back. I think being modern and looking at where it is and the views that they're wanting to take in, and I can understand the owner of that property wanting to have the visual amenity that they've got, which is looking out over the city and looking over the buildings and not looking down on the buildings. I think certainly the design aspects of these buildings are designed not to interfere with the privacy aspect of looking over and looking into those buildings, but just by virtue of them being there, the people below can see up and see them. And is that enough for us to consider whether we should refuse the document, refuse the planning today or not? I'm not convinced that it is at this point in time, but I'm still waxing on that one, and I'll consider that through. And I thank Mal for the conversations this morning, and certainly made me look at things a little differently to perhaps the way I was doing it. I think the conditioning of the screening was the other aspects, and the other comments that were raised in regards to the roadway and the construction. Again, all over the world there are issues when somebody is constructing something. There is going to be some issue associated with it. I appreciate Wellman Street's difficult with the two-way aspects of it, but the reality of it is you're going to Sydney, you're going to Melbourne, and they build things in very strange places, and they manage to manage those sort of things. So under the building and construction aspect of this, they will be required to put in a plan on how they do that to minimise the impact on the surrounding neighbourhood in relation to that. And the final issue I just wanted to raise was in relation to the overshadowing, number 2 Wellman Street. Again, I've seen the shadowing documents, and they would suggest that the overshadowing is only on the land and for a very small period of time. And this is all on the 21st of June each year in the solstice. So I'm comfortable based on the planning, based on the shadow diagrams that have been presented, that there is a reasonable control of the amenity associated with that building. So again, I've thrown a lot of things out there. I think I've covered most of the key issues, and I think the last one will just get back to the amenity aspect.
Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. Seconder, Councillor Harris.
Before I speak, perhaps just a couple of questions, if I may. And really it's just about to understand what we are approving today and the process that follows that. To George from 60 Degrees did explain it, that this is not a, that there are engineering works to be followed, but can we just have someone to explain what it is as a DA that we're approving today, and what does that contain? It obviously doesn't contain engineering drawings, and if and when it gets built, then where does the responsibility lie with the council, with the builder, with the survey, with the engineer, if that could be perhaps explained to us.
Thank you. Town Planner Duncan.
Thank you for that question. Today we're considering the conceptual notion of, will we approve the concept of building these 2 substantial dwellings on this site? We are not considering the stability of the site. We are not considering the method of construction. We are not considering what might happen later on if they do something wrong. All of those later events are not being considered here today. We are considering whether or not it is fair and reasonable to build 2 dwellings on this site. After the planning approval stage, if approval is given, then The developers will go ahead and they will get all of their appropriate engineering plans built. They will engage a building surveyor who will take ultimate responsibility for the site. The building surveyor will ensure that everything that is intended to happen complies with the requirements of the building code. Now, it's the building code that makes sure everything is safe, that there isn't a later catastrophe that we all hope to avoid. Some things, you can't predict what might happen in the future, but the stage we're dealing with today is the conceptual stage of, is it appropriate to have these two dwellings on this site? After this, if that gets approved, the technical plans and the like will be prepared. Substantial cost involved in getting all of those plans prepared, which is why they don't have to prepare them up front for us today. The building surveyor, as I said, takes the ultimate responsibility. The developer and the landowner are also responsible for what they do on their land. If something goes wrong in the future, all right, it will depend exactly on what it is goes wrong, and that will be investigated at that time. Right? It will not come back to say council shouldn't have given planning approval. It will be about the level and the of the engineering plans, the extent to which the building itself complied with those plans, or whatever else may have happened in the future. None of which is part of our consideration today.
Thank you, Duncan. Any further questions? Councillor Harris.
Just to, I guess, follow on from that. So during the engineering and building surveying stage, should the engineers decide that it's a good idea to collaborate with the building owners at 3, 5 and 7 York Street, where the wall already has its existing challenges, they can then agree to, if you like, build what we would consider a proper retaining wall now, rather than what is there. That's certainly one of the options that would be available to, if you like, mitigate the possible risk in the future. Is that correct?
Well, yes, that is correct. The engineers will have various options to consider in what's the most appropriate course of action to ensure that this building proceeds safely. Inevitably, consultation with the adjoining neighbours in regard to that wall will be a factor they will consider. What their decision is in regard to that is out of our hands.
Thank you, Town Planner. Any further questions, Councillor Harris?
No further questions at this stage. Obviously, if you're building, and we'll be speaking now, obviously building on a flat block of land at one of the outer suburbs of Launceston, such questions are pretty negligible, if at all considered. It's often about many other things that you'd be worried about. But I can certainly understand why the residents of York Street would be very concerned with what is happening on the land behind them, because obviously in time, in the perhaps 1840s, their land was excavated to create the flat building blocks that are there, as well as their backyards. And then a simple, I won't call it a retaining wall, I think a face wall is what they've called it, was created at the back of their property. And we've already seen the consequence of it in time when proper engineering has not been applied to such walls, when they're subject to things that perhaps the builders at the time had not considered. So it's very reassuring to me that we are not considering the engineering of that today. We are simply considering what is best for this site. And it may not be what is the ultimate best, but it is something that we can live with. The house itself is to be demolished. That's been approved, it's not up for discussion. Therefore, what could be built on the site? Now, it's about 1,000 square metres. You could build 3 or 4 single-storey brick townhouses, I guess, each with 300 odd square metres and a shared driveway. That may not overlook as much. However, I don't know that it's going to add to the architectural quality of our city. And our city is a city that's made up of many types of architectural qualities. And with the passing of time, we do tend to look at older architecture in much greater rose-coloured glasses than perhaps it might have been perceived at the time. And in fact, we've sent 1,200 letters out to people recently about the fact that their houses now need to be considered as part of our heritage, part of our built heritage. So what is proposed is very much a 2020s style of architecture. It is large, it has large amounts of glass, and by and large, when standing on that site, the view will be in fact to the horizon, down the Tamar, over the top of the city. The houses on York Street, whilst there, are not really in your sight line, but it's not to say you won't be able to see into their yards. Simple fact are you will. But for most people who would live in those new townhouses, the view is much greater when they look to the horizon rather than looking down. And as I have often said, the same problem occurs when people have 3 two-storey houses on flat land, as I do, and I live in the middle house as a two-storey, so I can see on my neighbours' yards on either side. Does that mean I look there? I tend not to. Does it improve or decrease my amenity? Doesn't really, because in reality, neighbours will tend not to look into your others' yards if they see you out there. They might wave hello, but they certainly won't see you if you're going to be sunbaking. I think they'd probably take the opportunity to go and look elsewhere. This is what I've found from my own experience. So I think for us, it's a matter of, do these 2 townhouses represent an investment in the future of Launceston that we are happy to approve? An investment of what modern architecture looks like and how it sits in the streetscape above the 1840s houses, but not part of the Littleton Street, probably late 1870s type of architecture along that street. Yes, it's modern, but it is the contrast that in fact will add to the other 2. To try, as Councillor Mackenzie said, to do it as a faux heritage is almost doomed to failure. And similarly, I feel, should we accept something that isn't perhaps so grand, then we are also not doing the site justice, because it is a grand site. It looks out over the city in a way that very few sites that I've been in recently actually do, and yet I never knew it was there. So at the end of the day, I'm fairly comfortable with where I'm at with my decision. I do really appreciate the comments made by Ben at by Malcolm at number 3 York Street. Interestingly, I did see you when you were down there through the trees, but it was very difficult to see you because the trees actually provide the thing. I do realise with autumn they probably lose their leaves. Yeah.
Let's contain our comments, Councillor Harris.
So I think it's, for me, this is well, I'll say a hard decision, and as Councillor Mackenzie said, it's one that I will be supporting.
You don't require additional time. Thank you. Any additional contributions? Councillor Kai.
I will not be supporting this development application today because I cannot see how this complies with the planning scheme. It does not meet the acceptable solution nor the performance criteria in so many ways. The proposed dwellings do not comply with acceptable boundary setbacks to the front, back and side boundaries. It also does not satisfy the acceptable solution of the site coverage of no more than 50%. The proposed dwellings exceeded that allowance. This development has a 55% site coverage, which is the proportion covered by the roofed area of the buildings. So this 55% does not include the structure of the 120 square metres of deck space. The scale of these 2 proposed buildings is significant, one being 526 square metres and one at 584 square metres, and each dwelling has more than 60 square metres of private open space in the proposed decks, which leaves very little capacity for natural green spaces such as lawns and trees. Then there are the decks that are less than the acceptable solution of 3 metres from the back boundary. This will lead to direct overlooking of the neighbouring courtyards and windows, and the residents of the adjoining properties will have their privacy and amenity unreasonably impacted. The construction of these buildings being so close to the back boundary is a huge concern, as there is an extremely steep drop at the boundary to the adjoining neighbours, and even though it is the responsibility of the building surveyors, but that does not ease the existing residents' concerns that there is no guarantee of the facing wall not collapsing during the vibrations from the constructions. A perfect example would be the old walls and fences that have fallen recently. The proposed dwelling clearly do not fit within the prescribed building envelope as a result of its height and proximity to the boundaries which will unreasonably impact on its surrounding neighbours. Therefore, this council has a responsibility to question or refuse DAs like this that clearly do not seem to comply. If we allow this development to go ahead, then we will be sending out a message to the public that this is okay to not comply with the rules and that they do not need to follow the guidelines. Therefore, what is the purpose of having a planning scheme at all? I urge landowners to engage planners that are respectful to the planning scheme and be more considerate when designing developments to fit within that framework. I personally believe that our planning scheme is there for a genuine reason and the rules are there for the community's protection and it should be followed. This decision should not be difficult when we clearly see a non-compliant DA that should be refused. We need to assure the community that we as a council are doing our job as the planning authority by making assessments based on the planning scheme and not support the recommendation to approve this development application.
Thank you, Councillor Kai. I'll let you go there. Some of your comments were perhaps a tad on the edge, but thank you for your contribution. Question from Councillor Dawkins.
With all due respect, may I get clarity around the non-compliant aspect of this development application, please? My understanding is that there is a permitted pathway through the discretions.
Town Planner Duncan.
Yes, thank you for that. It's a common misconception that not being able to satisfy the acceptable solution means you're not meeting the standards. The scheme is very clearly structured on the basis of acceptable solutions and performance criteria. So in a lot of instances, a permitted pathway, if you like, through the planning scheme assessment is to meet all of the acceptable solutions. The alternative approach is to meet the performance criteria. And it's important to understand that the performance criteria is not intended as a relaxation of the standard. It is simply another way of equal standing to meet that standard.
Thank you. Councillor Dawkins, are there any further questions? Councillor Walker, to speak or to ask?
To speak, thank you. I think the questions have been asked. The table's been set. The arguments have been made, thank you, Mayor. And we've certainly heard that this is not a vote and a decision about demolishing the building. It's not a decision about engineering feats or marvels. It's not a decision about the substrate composition. It's not a decision about how strong the retaining wall is. So what are we left with? It's a decision about a building or two buildings that do significantly cover a very challenging site. You might like to portray it as a wonderful monumental site, but it's a challenging site for anyone to build on. It's a decision about whether the excesses outside the building envelope, which is not a perfect rule by any means. It's a blunt instrument, if you like, in modern building because there's so many different designs that are capable of fitting inside or not fitting inside, as the case may be, and these things rely on performance criteria. And I do take the points that have been made by my fellow councillor Kai through you, Chair, that this building does challenge those particular performance criteria, especially when it comes to people's amenity, and especially when it comes to the setback. You know, these are the questions that we're deciding. We're also deciding these on, I suppose, what is defendable as far as a decision goes in the planning scheme. Now, this is where it gets, I suppose, nuanced, because we would like to be able to, at times, defend this, and I've said this myself, that, sometimes you have to lose a battle to win a battle. You have to make the point that you are not, as a council, happy with a certain pathway in order to send that message through the planning scheme and by that to potential developers that this council would like to see those restrictions slightly more adhered to, slightly more with slightly more discipline. But I suppose my point comes down to, yes, I can see how a building can be outside the envelope and still comply, but I can see that it impacts on the amenity of the neighbours. Yeah, I can see, as much as you can argue that, oh, well, look, we are significantly higher than our neighbours, we'll be looking out. We won't be looking down. We'll be looking out at the marvellous view. But the fact is, of course, you will also be looking down, and I know there's screens being provided. But the frustration as a councillor is that, of course, a smaller development could have been proposed, one that does sit within inside the planning scheme, doesn't rely on the performance criteria. But that's not what we're dealing with. We only deal with what is presented in front of us today. It will impact on what you would call the public space of the private open space of an adjoining dwelling. And I might finish on that question, Chair, if I could, ask our planning officers, how does the siting and the scale of this dwelling not overshadow the private open space of a dwelling on an adjoining property? And with that, I will say, as some other councillors have, I'm definitely struggling with this because we're dealing with developers who are pushing the boundary of what's possible on that site. I'm not to know what the substrate is. It could be solid basalt down there for all I know. But what I do know above the ground is that there will be impact on the privacy, which is the amenity of the neighbours on on York Street. There will be impact on the private open space of the property behind them or beside them, say on Wellman Street. So if I could get that question asked, and at this stage, depending on what is further discussed in regards to that, I won't be supporting this development application. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Walker, and thanks for the question. Town Planner Duncan.
All right, look, thank you. As best I can gather, then you're concerned about the potential impact on the amenity of the adjoining residents. And look, there's no doubt that this development is, as you described it, pushing the envelope. It will have an impact on the adjoining residents. This is entertained by the planning scheme, which is why the planning scheme refers to as what is an unreasonable impact. Right? At no point could we consider that you could develop on many of the blocks in the city without having an impact on your neighbours. The crucial question is whether or not it is unreasonable. Now, if we look at overshadowing coming back onto number 2 Wellman Street, yes, the private open space of number 2 will receive shadowing for a reasonable part of the winter months. I have followed that up with the applicants who have followed it up with the designers, and they have assured me that the shadows will not climb the walls and reach the windows. The shadows will come over the ground for part of the day during the winter months. Now, the question is that unreasonable? There is other ground around that site that won't be shadowed by this building. So I've looked at this and I've said, yes, there will be an impact. I don't believe it will be unreasonable, which is why I've said in my report that I believe it meets and satisfies that performance criteria. Similarly, with the overlooking of the properties to the north, the York Street properties, yes, there will be overlooking. They will be there. You're quite correct, Councillor, that sometimes, yes, there will be screens there which will minimise the overlooking, but that won't stop people from overlooking if that's what they want to do. I have to look at it and say, is that impact unreasonable? The bulk and the scale of the buildings on there, that will have an impact. If you're sitting down in one of those courtyards and you look up there, you will see these buildings. You will see that they're large buildings up there. Is it unreasonable to see those? That's the question I had to answer. That's why I've given you the answer that says, in my opinion, this is not an unreasonable impact.
Thank you, Town Planner. Councillor Dr. Raze to speak.
Thank you very much. This is not a common situation we are facing. Often building that is outside the envelope. The envelope is designed to follow our planning schemes. First, I would like to ask our planning officer, compared to other planning proposals in the past, this planning is outside the envelope. Can you say, what is it, like a minimum outside, medium? Can you give like figures about how much is it outside the planning scheme? Because I think that's relevant. because here we are facing two large buildings. It's not unreasonable to ask if they fit the envelope, perhaps the building will be smaller and then there will be less objections to it.
Councillor Dr. Razay, just so you know, the response is coming out of your own speaking time. Manager for Planning, Richard.
I just want to reiterate that the performance criteria is not to be seen as some lesser way of achieving the objective. So the degree to which you are outside, so the acceptable solution is essentially irrelevant when you're considering the performance criteria. So measuring the degree to which you're outside is not a decision-making criteria when you're assessing the performance criteria. The performance criteria are clear what the factors that you've got to assess are. And there is no doubt that this is significantly outside the building envelope in some areas, but that is not a reason in itself not to approve this development. You have to put it into the context of the objective of the standard and the things that you have to have regard to in the performance criteria.
Thank you. Dr. Razay, back to you.
And it's really hard sometimes because here we are facing two large buildings, and it's not that surprising they're outside the envelope. And if we keep passing these rules, well, all the developers in the future, they keep coming back to us outside the envelope, breaking the regulations. Well, what are we supposed to do here? We have to, give a message that you have to, follow the rules as well and regulation, and at least abide with our envelopes as in the planning scheme. And I feel that's pretty reasonable.
Councillor Razay, thank you. CEO, through you to Manager Planning, would it be possible again just to reiterate the way that you're able to achieve compliance in terms of the scheme, the way that compliance is achieved?
Just to reiterate again, the standards work is that they have an objective and then they have an acceptable solution, which is one way of meeting the objective. It's generally conservatively written, and if you meet that, you comply. That is not a regulation, and it is not a requirement that you meet it, and it's incorrect to characterise it that way. The performance criteria is an alternate way of meeting the objective. It requires a subjective judgment based on the facts of the situation, and it's very clear in what you have to have regard to. So just to be absolutely clear, not meeting the acceptable solution is not meeting a regulation, it's not stepping outside the scheme and shouldn't be characterised that way.
Councillor Dawkins, a question?
Yeah, so mine relates to the difficulties with the building envelope on the valley, on a hill, which I think is something that we come up against frequently, but I think can be misunderstood.
Manager Planning, Richard.
Clearly the building envelopes work more simply on flat blocks. It's much easier to understand the building envelope on a flat block. This block slopes in two directions in reasonably steep. It's reasonably steep in two directions. So when you apply the building envelope to that block, it becomes difficult to fit a normal sized building in, because if you are putting flat floors onto a slope, inevitably you will have land beneath the floor, which is added onto the height. It's slightly difficult to conceptualise, but if you imagine buildings in Trevallen or in West Launceston that are on slopes, normally the face of the building at the bottom of the slope is higher than the building at the top of the slope because of the way the land works. So the steeper the slope and the more complex the slope, the harder it is to get into a building envelope that is essentially designed for a flat block. That is why there is a performance criteria around these things. because 8.5 metres on a flat block is quite significant. 8.5 metres at the bottom of a steeply sloping block is still quite hard to achieve. It's very important in this case is to look very carefully at what the performance criteria say, the things that have regard to, and then relate it to the site in question when making a decision.
Thank you, Richard. Councillor Dawkins, any further questions? Question, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you, just looking for some clarification on the envelope and the criteria that this development is not setting a precedent for those to continue to follow, because there will always be these criteria and this envelope that any developer will be able to do the same sort of assessment. Just looking for clarification that it's not setting a precedent.
Manager Planning, Richard.
This is not setting any precedent. This is an individual judgment on an individual building. So this is an individual building proposal. The purpose of this is to understand that this site, this building, what the planning scheme says, what the discretions are, and then to turn our minds or your minds to how those plans relate to those things that we have to decide, and then make your mind up about whether it meets that objective or not, considering the things that we are required to consider. Every situation is different, and one does not, because if we approved or refused this development today, in no way has any bearing on how we turn our minds to a subsequent development on a different site with different characteristics.
Thank you. Councillor McMahon to speak.
Thank you, Mayor. The proposed development is to look above roof lines, and why wouldn't you? We've all seen the view from up in Tamer Street. The views will be providing the building owner with an amazing visual amenity, but the scale and bulk of the building and proximity to boundaries in turn means a loss of amenity, in particular for 3 York Street. I don't feel the only concern is looking down, but for the loss of amenity looking up. And I guess we need to decide if that loss of amenity is enough not to support the DA.
Thank you, Councillor McMahon. Councillor Pentridge.
Being able to sympathise and listening to everyone, and probably being able to sympathise with the Philpotts, I would think I live in the biggest fishbowl in Launceston. So I can understand what it's like being peered down from all over Launceston. And I think we tend to forget we've all got, well, I'll leave that one alone. I think the Philpotts, having known them for quite some time, are pretty hard workers. And I think that they deserve their amenity and deserve to, they've worked hard to get what they've got. They enjoy their home, and they should be allowed to continue enjoying it. On the other hand, knowing the developer, I believe that he has the ability, and he's indicated to me in conversation, the willingness to work with his neighbours to amend and try and satisfy their concerns. Now, I have to make a decision too. Although I approve of development, and I think it's a very large block, and I don't think we should restrict the size of things. People have the right to build en-suites and God knows what else these days. And I think it will be a good development on a very large block. But at the same time, I feel for the Philpotts, and I've been assured by the developer. I mean, he's got one of the, no, that's probably out of line too, but he's got a good architect who has a reputation for being compassionate. And I'm pretty sure that you've got to believe someone. Now, I will be supporting the development on the basis that I've been assured that he will continue working with his neighbours to try and rectify their problems. When I say their amenity problems, right? And so he'll have my support today. And I'm sorry for the Philpotts, because they do deserve, and I'd like to tell them that this man's assured me, well, the developer has assured me that he will work with them, and I'll be very disappointed in him if he doesn't. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Pentridge. Lots in that. Manager of Planning, assurances from a developer to a councillor. How can that be captured with regard to anything other than a private conversation?
In my view, they're not relevant to the decision being made today, although they provide context, but they're not relevant to the matters that need to be considered under the scheme.
Thank you. A question from Councillor Britton.
Sorry, I was actually going to speak.
Oh, great. Right? Yes.
I think inevitably, no matter what, something is going to happen on this block one day. I think the height and the loss of amenity to the fill pots is always going to be inevitable, regardless what does end up going there. It would appear, though, to me, this is as big and as bulky as it can probably get. I do sympathise, I can't remember who said it before, but people will look straight down into their backyard. I think it's a bit of I understand it, but it's a bit airy-fairy to think that they're only going to look out over the city. There's been plenty of DAs where we've felt, well, I know I've felt like my hands are tied. I've said that 18,000 times in this room, I think. I don't feel that way today. I do feel like there is going to be a loss of amenity, and they're the people who live there at the moment. It's their place, it's their land, and this is something that we do have the ability to say no. I think, and I think we owe it to them. There's been plenty of times where I haven't been able to do that, and today I will be saying no to the application on those grounds. Knowing though, unfortunately, if I had the money and the time, I'd probably build a nice big house there as well. I'd try and do my best for you, but but look, it will happen one day. I do think this is as big and as bulky as it can get, though, and yes, I won't be approving it. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Britton. Noting that Councillor Dr. Razay departed at 2:15. Question from Councillor Dawkins.
Can we please step out the process that if this DA was refused today and we were to defend at the tribunal at TASCAT on loss of amenity, how that might look?
Manager of Planning, Richard.
If the application is refused today, the developer, the applicant, would have the opportunity to appeal that decision. If it was to go to an appeal, given that the council officers had made a recommendation to approve the development and council refused it, the council officers would seek to engage a planning consultant to defend the council's refusal. The first stage of a planning scheme, the first stage of a planning appeal is always the opportunity to mediate. Now, if what Councillor Pentridge's view is that the developer is willing to mediate, then that might be an opportunity to mediate. If there's no mediation possible, it will go to a contested hearing, and at that point, the relative experts prepare evidence, which is statements of their beliefs based on the plans and the situation. A hearing takes place, and then ultimately a decision is made.
Subsequent question, Councillor Dawkins.
Can I just ask the question of what that would cost council from a financial perspective if we were to engage a planning barrister, I guess they are, to defend a decision that council law support but council officers do not?
Thank you.
It would. It's hard to guess because it does depend on whether it mediates or whether it goes to a contested hearing, and it also depends on what evidence is required, but it could be in the region of $30,000. It's important, though, in that to remember that if council approve it today, the representatives can also exercise their right to an appeal, in which case council would participate, and some of those costs would be borne at that. if council were to approve it, the council officers would defend the decision, so there would be slightly less cost. But there are
Thank
costs
you.
in it both ways.
Councillor Razzo back at 219. Councillor Dawkins, any further questions? Councillor Palmer.
Thank you very much, Mayor, and I'm really encouraged by Councillor Pentridge over the discussions he's had with the developers. That's really positive in my book. But for me, where it stands is the loss of amenity, and on that basis, I will be voting against the recommendation today. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor Palmer. Are there any other contributions at this point? Are there any further questions? Councillor Councillor Pentridge, yep.
Look, I think we've done this before, but we've got the parties with us. We have got other issues here today. Is there any point in the parties having a chat to see whether they are prepared to compromise and whether there is room to compromise so that everyone can get on with their projects one way or the other? It seems pointless in going to all the expense of an appeal and all the issues that are associated with it. If at the end of the day the parties can sit down, I mean, I think both parties have heard a pretty genuine feeling from everyone.
Thanks, Councillor Pentridge. Look, I would say, look, there's 16 representations. There are 2 or 3 in the room. It wouldn't be appropriate to do that at this stage. Thank you for the question. Councillor McKenzie, do you wish to close?
Thanks, Mayor. I will, and thanks everybody for the conversation. We've been around and we've talked about rules, and I think we need to be very clear that the rules aren't the rules that you think they are. The performance criteria make those rules broader than what a lot of people think. So I think you need to be very clear, and our officers do a lot of work. There's the acceptable solution, which is easy. We'll have a lot of very similar houses being built everywhere if everybody does the acceptable solution. The performance criteria enables our clients, our ratepayers to go out there and build something which is a bit different and challenge the topography, which I think has been well described, makes it difficult to fit into a cookie cutter type arrangement, which the acceptable solution gives us. We've got down to, I think the nub of the conversation is, which is amenity. Said in very few words by 2 or 3 people, which I think is really where it gets back to. And again, until I spoke to Mr. Philpott this morning, I probably had a different view on the amenity and the way that it looked. And I think that's probably the key element on which we should vote today in relation to where we're going to end up with this process. Noting that if there's a refusal today, there's a conversation that will still go on, and a conversation that I think the other way around that Councillor Pentridge was looking at is going to come from a refusal rather than from an approval. And hopefully we can get an outcome on that. So I won't be supporting the motion today.
Thanks, Councillor McKenzie. We'll put the vote. All those in favour, raise their hand. Councillor Harris and Pentridge. Those against? The remainder, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Therefore, the motion is lost. I now seek someone to move a motion for refusal with the grounds. I wonder, have any councillors got that? CEO.
So in listening to the debate, staff have prepared an alternate resolution which we can put up on screen that picks up on the major issues that were identified. So we can get that up on screen. Just need to be patient.
You're right. That's okay. It's all good. Okay, so the motion, CO, is now on the screen.
Hang on a second. I can't look forward and backwards at the same time. So the motion in the alternative would be that in accordance with section 51 and 57 of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act 1993 and the Tasmanian Planning Scheme Launceston, a permit be refused for DA 0580 of 2022 residential construction of a dwelling at 112 Tamar Street on the following grounds. The siting and scale of the proposed development causes an unreasonable loss of amenity to adjoining properties through the overshadowing of the private open space of a dwelling on an adjoining property and does not satisfy clause 8.4.2 P3A2, and that the siting and scale of the proposed dwelling causes an unreasonable loss of amenity to the adjoining properties through the visual impacts caused by an apparent scale, bulk or proportions of the dwelling when viewed from an adjoining property and does not satisfy clause 8.4.2 P3A4 of the scheme.
Okay, thank you. A question, if it's not procedural, is it a procedural question? Okay, we couldn't do that at this stage. So if you'd like to stand and move, whatever you'd like to move, utilising what's been provided for you there as a starting point, that will initiate the conversation. Okay, you wish? Okay, thank you. Does someone wish to move what has been provided by our officers as a starting point? Councillor McMahon is moving, as noted on the screen. Someone to second. Thank you, Councillor Kai. A question from Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. I just question and perhaps seek the advice through you, Mayor, to our planning officers why we would not include 8.4.6 and also 8.4 point 3, is it where the private open space for all dwellings?
Thanks, Councillor Walker. So, Manager Planning, Councillor Walker's questions regarding to the standards that required initial planning discretion and why they wouldn't be provided in this alternate.
Well, I think it needs to be made very clear that this isn't a recommendation of the officers.
No.
So it's up to the council to include whatever they feel is appropriate. These have been generated because these are the key issues as we see them. But if you want to add more issues because the council feel that's appropriate.
And just double checking, Richard, that the reference to clause 8.4.2 and 8.4.2 repeated is in fact correct, or should it be an additional?
No,
it's A2 and A4.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Councillor Walker, any additional questions, or does that help you? I can come back to you in a moment. Yep. So, mover, Councillor McMahon. Do you wish to speak to the motion? Councillor Kai. Any councillor wishing to? Councillor Dawkins.
Look, it's with great reluctance that I vote against a council officer's recommendation. I do it extremely rarely because I understand that in this room, this is a part of where the knowledge is held about these matters. And I understand that defending this at the tribunal is going to be very difficult. But I think there are times where listening to the community and listening to the voices of other councillors around the table takes precedent. And in this instance today, this has happened to me. I came into this very uncertain about how I was going to vote. It wasn't clear to me. It's not necessarily that I'm concerned about the building structure and the engineering. I put my faith in the scientists and knowledgeable people to make safe this build when and if it occurs. It is for the loss of amenity. These buildings are so incredibly imposing on this site. And for me, it had gone to a stage where I can no longer sit and happily vote in approval because I don't think I would sleep tonight if I did. So it is with great reluctance And I appreciate that this is quite a sombre occasion. It's not an occasion for joy. This is one where we now work through a series of problems in order to be able to defend this at a tribunal if this is the next step. So, as we said, this does not set precedents for anybody else. This is based on this today, this particular DA that we have such significant discomfort with that as a collective we could not see this go through.
Thanks, Councillor Dawkins. Councillor McKenzie.
Thanks, and I'm a bit like Councillor Dawkins. I usually am pretty good at taking advice from our advice officers. They certainly advised me this wasn't an easy decision in relation to their recommendation. I feel difficult. I know both parties in relation to the matter, and for me to change, because I guess I came here with an open mind, which is why I've ended up where I've ended up, but probably thinking I'd vote the opposite way to which I did on the initial motion. Because I felt that the building, whilst it sat outside the envelope, actually still is going to be there. And I think whatever we end up with, the visual bulk is still going to be there because of the site that it's on. And I'm hopeful that the two buildings that the proponent wishes to do, and maybe thought out a little bit differently, will provide an outcome where the neighbours can live with that as well, but still end up with the dream that they're looking for in relation to the matter. To me, it certainly just got back to the amenity aspect for me, and it wasn't the looking out amenity, it was the looking up amenity that really got me this morning, which is what changed my view. Otherwise, I was probably all for what was going on, because I think the development will be a good development in due course on this site, and I'm just saddened by the fact that I'm doing what I'm doing.
Thank you, Councillor McKenzie. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. I would like to move either an amendment to the existing refusal, or if that is appropriate,
sure,
that we would include 8.4.6 privacy for all dwellings, and that would be the performance, performance criteria, relying on the performance. Where are we? 8.4.6. It's the boundary. Which one is it? The proposed dwelling includes substantial decks that are located within 3 metres of the northwestern side boundary. Is that the side boundary or the rear boundary? It's the side boundary. So 8.4.6A1 and in brackets A, I do believe, would be the most appropriate.
So 8.4.6 A1. A.
That be included also in the motion to refuse, and I'm not standing to justify that at the moment. I'm just putting that
Great.
in there.
Thank you. And let's just get the words of that
That's
incorporated,
right.
and then I'll ask you to. We'll seek a seconder for that. Yeah. I've also, while we're just getting that on the screen, I've made a note that we need to double check the names with regard to that previous motion, because I think the screen might have had them wrong. Is that right? Yeah. I think what we might do at 2:33 is to take a 5-minute break. We'll come back at 2:38. That will take off some of the pressure of our admin staff. Thank you. Council off air. and reopening the meeting at 2:38, noting that all councillors are back with the exception of Councillor Kai, who will join us imminently. Okay, during the break, we've added point 3. Councillor Walker has added point 3. The proposal does not satisfy 8.4.6p1, privacy for all dwellings, as it would cause unreasonable overlooking, impacting privacy. This amended motion has been moved by Councillor Walker. Councillor Walker, are you satisfied by adding that 3?
I am, Mayor.
Someone to second the amendment. Seconded Councillor Britton. So, Councillor Walker is now speaking to the addition of the number 3. The proposal does not satisfy 8.4.6p1 as it was cause unreasonable overlooking, impacting privacy. We're just speaking to that one clause, point 3. Councillor Walker, over to you.
Thank you, Mayor. I thought I would be speaking to the entire amended motion.
It's not an amended motion yet.
So this is accepted. Thank you. I think it speaks for itself. Thank you, Mayor. I just thought it was prudent to include that because it was one thing that even the mover of the initial acceptance of the DA noted being important, the overlooking and impact of that privacy. Thank you, Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Walker. Seconder to the amendment, Councillor Britton. Anyone wishing to speak to the 3rd dot point, which is added to the motion? Yes, Councillor Mackenzie.
I'm concerned about that additional clause on the basis that the application was conditioned to deal with the overlooking issue by screening, and therefore I'm concerned that it actually adds any value to it.
Councillor Kai, welcome back. Councillor Harris has a question.
I do have a question, and that is to ask what is gained by adding this condition to the motion when it gets to the Planning Appeals Tribunal. Does it lessen our case or in fact make it stronger because we now have 3 items under which it can be, they can agree with us? And I'd just like to hear from the planner's experience on what that might be.
Manager Richard, with regard to the process from here to appeal.
When we get to an appeal, depending on what the appeal is, will set the grounds for how the appeal is dealt with. But it's important to note that when the council engages a planning consultant, that planning consultant will be asked to turn their minds to the application. The application's a de novo hearing, which means it's heard from scratch. That planning consultant who's representing council's refusal will have the opportunity to include anything in that at the time that they think strengthens the case for council's refusal, and generally do that. So the matter's looked at afresh. The council decision certainly provides context for that, but it's not binding on what may or may not be argued once a alternative planner looks at it.
Great, thank you. Another question, Councillor Harris.
So just to clarify that, reading it says privacy for all dwellings to provide a reasonable opportunity for privacy for dwellings. If the planner that we engage considers that there's not, that it does provide reasonable opportunity for privacy, then he doesn't have to use this as part of his defence, if you like. And he has the opportunity to add other points that we haven't included, should he think they are better to prove our point.
We will seek a planner that can defend council's decision. The issue here is that the planning consultants will argue a case if they believe that case is correct, and they can reasonably argue it as a planning professional. Now, as we know, when we get decisions that go against council's planners, so sometimes we find planners and sometimes we struggle. In this case, given the circumstances of the case, I think it's likely that we're going to be able to find a planner that can argue council's case. That planner will look at all these issues and then will determine to the extent that they believe this is valid, and that they will take those things forward to a contested hearing as they see fit in conjunction with council's lawyer at the time. But this does certainly provide context of council's view of the matter when they determined it, which is important and it will be important going forward.
Okay, does anyone else wish to speak to the amendment? Councillor Walker, do you wish to close? We're now taking a vote on the addition of point 3. The proposal does not satisfy 8.4.6p1 as it would cause unreasonable overlooking impacting privacy. All those in favour of adding that, raise your hand. That is all councillors present. The motion is carried and therefore it becomes the substantive motion. So it's moved by Councillor McMahon, seconded by Councillor Kai. Councillor Walker, do you wish to speak now to the motion?
Only just say that, you know, it's been a important discussion. Of course, we know that we have our esteemed planners who have made their professional evaluations, but what is in question essentially comes down to the word amenity and adjoining properties, and that's what's been tested, and indeed what has to be tested. There is a building envelope. There would be a way to build within that envelope too on that land, as much as it does slope. You know, there would be ways to build within that. I hope and I trust that councillors are doing this in a sense of responsibility to their community. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Does anyone else wish to speak to the refusal motion? No? Any questions? Councillor McMahon, do you wish to close? Okay, so just so we're all clear, we're about to take a vote on a motion to refuse based on those 3 points that were on the screen. All those in favour of refusing the motion, raise your hand. Those against? That is carried unanimously. The motion is therefore carried. Thank you. Could we also just go back to double check the recording of the previous vote, if that's okay? I'll fix it. Great. Thank you. All right, let's move to 9.2, the Relbia Subdivision Specific Area Plan. There are no speakers. Someone to move. Thanks, Councillor Harris. A seconder. Councillor Walker. Councillor Harris, do you wish to speak to the motion?
We will briefly. This is the, I guess, the moment when we now put this amendment to start the process with the planning scheme to make the amendment to change some of the zoning size of, change the zoning that allows certain size blocks within the Relbia area. It has been subject to lots of ongoing community consultation, lots of discussion both around the table but also out in the community. I think there was at least 3 different community meetings where people had the opportunity to say. If we say yes to this, then it still is open to further community consultation. So in very broad terms, it is where an interim allotment or an interim planning scheme amendment was put forward to create no less than 10 acre or 4 hectare lots in Relbia. That is now to be amended to allow in certain areas 1 hectare or 2 acres or 2.5 acre blocks in one area, and along the Relbia, first part of the Relbia Road from Hobart Road to allow 2 hectare or 5 acre blocks to be created there, where currently the scheme prohibits it. In most other cases, it is the retention is kept at the 4 hectares or 10 acre lots, There is also at the other end of the subdivision, if you like, if you're coming off the Quarantine Road area, there will be some changes there that will allow for 2 acre or 2 hectares or 5 acre lots there. So a lot of work's got into this by our planning people. I think it's just about was ongoing before I got on council in 2018. So it's taken us nearly 4.5 years to get to this point, but it still is not yet. But it is starting the actual thing. We're getting serious now. And I do encourage everyone to support this because I think it makes it clear for those who live in Relbia what they can or can't do with their land. And I think it is been well considered about the character of Relbia and what is best for the future planning needs of our city. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Harris. Seconder, Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you, I might pick up from the last words of my previous speaker, the future needs of our city. This is where Launceston City Council is trying to look ahead to the future, to know that where our population is increasing, the demands for people wanting to find land to build houses is increasing. We're not wanting to endlessly stretch our suburban boundaries in every direction. We're wanting to contain them where possible, and Council has gone through an exhaustive consultation process with the people of Relbia. Hasn't always been perfect. I'm sure everyone who's been involved would be happy to admit that, but it has been done. And it's been done again, and it will be done again. And there are people in Relbia who are all for this proposal, and there are some people who will be against it. And there will be some people who are probably nonplussed either way. That will probably be the case with every decision we ever make. But in this case, it has been thought through carefully and planned carefully. There are other things that, potentially I would like to see there as well. When it comes to the potential for a certain amount of commercial activity. I mean, is it a suburb that will have a centre and things like that? These are things that have been discussed as well. But this is a part of a process that ensures, if you like, the ongoing rural nature of Relbia. The reason why, as many people have said, the reason why they chose to live there, that is maybe not wholly, but is largely protected in this process. And as the mover of this motion, through you, Chair, has said, this is still part of an ongoing process. Now, we have determined our position that we, at this stage, feel comfortable to pursue. We will get further feedback. There is opportunity to look at this again and to review whether we recommend, continue to recommend this to the Planning Commission. So we have to begin moving on these things. The nature of Tasmania is changing. From the East Coast, I was going to say to the West Coast, maybe not so much to the West Coast, from the East Coast to the Northwest Coast, there are pressures for expansion, for building, for more housing. And this is the consequence of one of those, but this has been handled in a way that has allowed people to have an active say, and hopefully continues that people will adopt and adapt to this new plan. Thank you, Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Walker. Councillor Dr. Raze.
Thank you very much. I acknowledge that of the comprehensive strategic review of Relbia by the City of Launceston to investigate supporting further residential development and comprehensive consultation with Relbia community through workshops. I also acknowledge the recommendation to maintain Relbia as low-density and rural living area, with some limited changes allowing to small subdivision, like from 4 hectares in some places to 2 hectares. My question will be, what guarantee will give to Relbia community that there will be no further rezoning in the future and turn it into more residential zoning with urban purposes?
Thank you, Councillor Dr. Raze. Manager Planning, Richard.
Well, simply there's no guarantee. I mean, if this progresses, this will go into the planning scheme, and this will be in the planning scheme until the planning scheme changes. What a future council and a future community might do is up to them at the time. But for the purposes of today and for the foreseeable future, this will be the planning regime. In 50 or 100 years' time, there's no certainties. The world may look different.
Yes, thanks.
Now, Railbia is not just a rural residential area, but also it's a touristic region with 5 vineyards and a large winery there. Now, vineyards, as you know, they have regular spraying using fungicide and pesticide from September to April. And that includes some chemical like sulfur and copper. With the new subdivision, that means some large lot which are close to large vineyards, they will be exposed to these chemicals. The questions will be, what's the safe distance between dwelling and vineyard to make it, to reduce the health risk for the neighborhoods? I know in the planning scheme you mentioned minimum of 50 meters between dwelling. Do you think that's actually safe for properties so close to massive vineyards around there?
Thanks, Councillor Dr. Razay. Manager of Planning, Richard.
I don't believe the setbacks in the scheme are to cater for the potential for overspray of chemicals onto your neighbour. Those things are dealt with under regulations, and I don't believe it's appropriate to have any overspray necessarily onto residential neighbours. So those things are beyond the planning regulations, and I don't believe that that's under the council's jurisdiction to regulate.
Thank you.
May I continue?
Thank
Thank you. Now, Railbia has been zoned as rural and agriculture, and but with the new subdivision, we will change it into more rural residential, which will allow more blocks in the area. Currently, there are 268 blocks, and there will be an addition of 157 new lots in the future. There is a concern about the safety of the traffic and increased use of Railbia Road by cyclists, walkers, tourists, but more importantly, heavy vehicles used for large vineyards and wineries. The question will be, will this new subdivision of Railbia plan allow to consider major improvement of Railbia Road infrastructures, like the Jingle Creek Bridge and also the T-junction with join Railbia Road to Hobart Road?
Thank you. Manager Planning, Richard.
As part of the investigations that led to the recommendations you have before you, a significant traffic study was done on the traffic itself and the safety of all the junctions, accesses, road alignments, vertical and horizontal road alignments. And a report was prepared which highlighted that there were some issues that needed to be addressed over the long term. So those things...
Okay, thank you, Richard.
Time up.
Don't take that personally. We need that in other circumstances. Might we please be able to have an extension of time for Councillor Dr. Razay and his questions? Thank you. Councillor Harris has moved. Seconded Councillor McKenzie. All those in favour raise their hand. That's all councillors present. An extension is granted. And Richard, use the time wisely.
Just to conclude, there were no showstoppers in the traffic. Now, that report has been received by the Council's infrastructure assets area, and those things will be programmed and considered in future budgets for upgrade. But in terms of the level of development that's proposed in this, there is nothing in the traffic analysis or the safety analysis that suggests that this isn't appropriate.
Thanks. Councillor Dr. Razay, anything further? Thank you. Any other contributions? Councillor Mackenzie.
Thank you. Might be just useful to explain to Dr. Raza, you should just go question mark, that way it doesn't impact on your time, rather than asking questions in your speaking time. It might make life easier if you won't get the ding. Look, this has been a very robust process in a previous council in relation to the discussions in Relbia. The people of Relbia are very passionate about where they live and what they've got, and a lot of them bought out there under the 4 hectare rule, and therefore there was significant debate regarding changing that away from something when they bought into the area, which was caused consternation. So there was a 3 major change, limited change and no change, I think. And I think some wanted no change at all, but there are a number, even those that have lived there for a long period of time, that wanted limited change. So we've ended up with a limited change model, which actually targets particular areas of Relbia, that some are rural and turning into rural resource or rural whatever it is now. So I think it's a really good, robust process. And I think since we discussed it last at council, there's been some augmentation to some of those things, a couple of more blocks here and there that have been added. This is the start of the process to have the SAP put in place. The community will, if we approve this today, will have 28 days in which to make us known on what they think about what we're doing. At which time we'll come back around this table and decide whether there's anything of substantive in there which may change the view in which we wish to go forward with. So I think this is a good process. It's been a long process, but I think it's really paying homage to the people who live out in Relbia in the way that we've gone about it. There have been a few trips along the way, but we've managed to get over those, and I think we're now on the homeward straight.
Thanks, Councillor Mackenzie. Councillor Pentridge.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As I previously indicated, and having been out there to assist some of the people, we have got some water issues in there, and maybe the question I'd be asking, has anyone looked at that? Has anyone looked at what is going to be the long term, particularly, I mean, I've just realised there's water out there. What about our stormwater? And will that fall unfairly on the people in the lower parts to provide enough stormwater for everyone else?
Thanks, Councillor Pentridge. Richard, General Manager Shane. Thank you.
Well, in terms of water supply, that's a question for Taswater. In terms of stormwater, it's outside the urban drainage area, and currently, based on the current zoning, it's treated as rural stormwater management. So I'm unclear as to what the expectation is in terms of stormwater management, given that it is managed on property with open drains at the moment without an urban network.
Councillor Pentridge.
That's correct, but as Councillor Raza just said, we're just about doubling the amount of blocks, and therefore we're going to increase not necessarily the volume of water, but the water travelling from developed blocks to the drainage systems. So that's going to become a major problem, and I can just foresee a lot more problems out there with the residents. It needs to be looked at. Surely, I would have thought that we've got to look at the fact that there will be stormwater issues. How are we going to address them? And before we agree for everyone to have their blocks, which I haven't got a problem with, I'm only concerned that it's going to fall back on the people in the lower areas who are now being flooded in downpours anyway. If that makes sense.
It doesn't make sense. I'm sure it makes sense, General Manager, but do you have anything further to your previous response?
Only that I'm not sure the provisions that are in front of you today are suggesting that there's going to be a doubling of properties and development at Relbia, and maybe our manager planning might be able to clarify that. In terms of any intensification in terms of subdivision, then that infrastructure provision gets dealt with and considered at that stage, which is at the suitable time to consider infrastructure provision.
Thank you. Richard?
I think the figure of 157 blocks is a theoretical maximum number that's allowable. That's the area divided by the allowable lot size. Now, there's an awful lot of reasons why a lot of those won't be able to develop. Some won't have the access, some won't be able to deal with their sewer, their septic, there may be natural values that prevent it. Some people just won't want to subdivide. Some people have built their houses in the middle of their lots. So the 157 lots is not likely ever to be achieved, and it's certainly not likely to be in any reasonable time frame. So the expectation of the change in Relbia will be incremental over a significant portion of time. I'm sure there are some people that want to subdivide immediately because they've been waiting for it. And there's quite a few of those, so we might get a few, but there'll be a lot who've clearly stated, and as you know, they won't subdivide. So the change will be incremental. Any changes, significant changes to infrastructure as a result of that can be planned consistent with the development applications when they come in and developed over time in response to those.
And Manager of Planning, is there anything further with regard to service provision that you'd like to add subsequent to what General Manager Shane said?
Taswater have indicated that there's no lack of quantity, so that sufficient supply is there to cater for additional houses at the amount proposed.
Thank you. Councillor Pentridge, any further questions? Any further contributions or questions? Question, Councillor Kai.
Just a question, I don't know if you've already covered it or not, but if some residents who decide not to subdivide, they can do that, correct? So it's only the ones who want to subdivide can subdivide. That was all. Thank you.
Yeah, sure, correct. Any other contributions? No? Councillor Harris, do you wish to close?
I will, and thank you for the questions and the other comments. I guess it's just fair to say that this is rural living, and as our General Manager said, rural living means that there is no provision of stormwater services. That's part of the benefit of living in a rural living, along with having a bit of acreage around you, that if you live at the bottom of the gully, that the natural fall will end up on your property. So it is something that you can't have everything. If you want to have stormwater drains, then we won't zone it rural living, we'll zone it residential, and you'll come with all the other problems that come with it. So I'm happy that this goes forward. I just wanted to, I was looking for the address, and Redwood Crescent is the one exception of where the zone currently will allow 1 hectare or 2.5 acre lots. Currently that runs off Youngtown, and for the residents of Youngtown, the residents of Redwood Crescent, they don't consider themselves really to be part of Relbia because they have no way to get there other than troping across someone else's private property. They actually consider themselves part of Youngtown, but that's the purple area that's shown on our map, and that will allow subdivision of their lots down to smaller lots, which is probably a logical boundary, as Councillor Walker said, between those residential lots where we have people, building smaller houses, or large houses, smaller blocks, and this will provide that natural barrier, as in fact will the development along the both accesses into Relbia by having 2 hectare minimum size lots. It will mean it will be difficult in the future for a single person to develop that into 600 square metre blocks because it's not very big. And there's going to be a house somewhere probably in the middle of it, as Richard had said. And so as such, this really will help define that southern boundary of residential sprawl won't go into Relbia because of these smaller lots. Yes, there'll be 5 acre lots or 2 hectare lots, but it will certainly not be, in my opinion, down to the very small lots that we currently see. Unless, of course, as Richard said, a future council and a future citizens of Launceston choose to change that planning scheme. So look forward to your support on this one.
Thanks, Councillor Harris. All those in favour raise their hand. That is all councillors present. The motion is carried. Sorry. I beg your pardon, I couldn't see. All those in favour raise their hand. Those against? Councillor Dr Raze against. It's carried 11-1. Thank you. Council no longer sits as a planning authority. Item 10, announcements by the Mayor, 10.1. They are listed. Are there any questions? Item 11, councillors' reports. Councillor Dawkins.
Just briefly, I attended and spoke at the Suicide Prevention Forum, the 2023 Life Awards, and what I came away with was the sense of joy in the room for people who have stepped right outside of something that felt comfortable and been able to really make a difference. It was quite something. And the value of everyday conversations when it comes to mental health is the thing that really was pronounced to me. So I think what I'm taking away from it is don't forget to make yourself feel uncomfortable, to step into something, to ask somebody how they are, because you might be the person who makes the difference.
Thanks, Councillor Dawkins. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Can I start off by saying how busy March has been, and a bit of a response to anybody who decided to respond to the March newsletter on social media by saying that there's nothing going on. There was lots. So just to speak just to a couple of things, I was privileged to open the incredibly well-attended and engaging ukulele jamboree. A shout out must be given to Jackie and her team for the thought and planning that was put into this 3-day event. So from a small start in 2021, it's very exciting to see that this event has grown with great community support, and that is one of the things that is so special about our city in which we are fortunate to live, work, and as they choose to play ukuleles. We appreciate opportunities to gather and share, and our culture is fashioned by what is given within our community. Both of those who were born through this amazing mix of those who have come to call Launceston home, or performing from interstate or further, bringing with them the ideas, talents, experiences and cultures that we all embrace here as a vibrant Launceston. The Jamboree, it offered a plethora of options, from concerts, workshops, open mic sessions, music, market, and of course the flash mob. It was great to walk through, particularly on that Saturday, to see how well attended and how busy the mall was. So that was fantastic. The organisers, they've also relished in the opportunity to give back during this experience, giving back to the community by utilising fundraising, and through this genuine spirit of giving and receiving, we all benefit. A combination of good music, gratitude, it's all good for, as Councillor Dawkins was just saying then, health and well-being. And just the second one, Michelle, my brother and I, we rode out to Nunamara. It was a surprisingly sunny April day, which I was privileged to speak and represent the Mayor at the St Patrick's River Valley Day. Now, Nunamara is an area that my family's been quite involved with, doing a lot of development and helping with the forestry out there, putting roads and whatnot. So the St Patrick's River Valley Day, it's a celebration of the history of the St Patrick's River District, and in so it pays tribute to the district's pioneering days of agriculture, forestry and mining, and the contribution that that district has made and continues to make to the city of Launceston. They had some wood chopping championships, which had actually appealed to the US Timber Sports champion, Matt Kogart, who was off about a 30 seconds. And yeah, it was just great to hit the further parts of our Launceston municipality, as we often see with Lilydale and out through to Nunamara. It was a great day. I look forward to continuing to work with the councillors and the CEO on some of the things that they were able to bring to my attention throughout the day as well. But yeah, just some really great community and very vibrant things happening throughout Launceston and our municipality.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Mackenzie.
Thank you. And to add weight to the Deputy Mayor's comments in representing our council as representative on the Launceston Airport, we were proud yesterday to welcome our millionth passenger for the financial year into Launceston, somebody from Sydney, which was great. And also, just to sort of off the back of that, our March numbers show that we're about 97% of pre-COVID travelling into Launceston, which is probably, if not the, one of the most, the best airports in their comeback post-COVID. So things are going very well. There's lots happening in March, there's lots happening in April, and there's even more happening in May. So the events keep rolling into Launceston. It's a place to visit, and backwards and forwards there's things to go to in Melbourne and so forth, but it's really happening out there at the moment. And I shouldn't, one of those very important things, the Hawks came to town and we had a great win.
Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. Any additional councillor reports? Item 12, 12.1, councillors' questions on notice. We have one from Councillor Kai, a response there on vandalism ideas. Great. And 12.2, councillors' questions without notice. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm actually just on the back of Councillor McKenzie with the Hawthorn game. So Michelle and I, we headed along to the game on Saturday, and as I have internally sent around to the councillors and the management, I was a little disappointed to walk out of the game to find the plethora of fines that had been issued whilst we were away in the game. So I raised those concerns, and I do stand by those concerns whilst that's not a reflection of my personal opinion of the council staff themselves. I fully understand that there are criteria that make parking on the grass and levies a finable offence, but for me it's just not the kind of narrative that I think this council is willing to participate in, and what in particular I'm standing for as well. So having said that, I agree that we need to protect our businesses in particular, and I know that with taking those 115 tickets back, that the ones that will continue to be penalised were the ones that impacted the Invermay Road and residents there, which I think is fair. So given that we made that decision, I would like to just ask without notice what we're doing to put steps in place to continue to communicate with our community, but also to address this issue moving forward.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. General Manager Dan.
Thank you for the question, Councillor, and thank you for raising the concern initially. I guess noting that our next game is Sunday, April 23, so Hawks versus Crows, that's not too far away. I guess I go to what should be our desired outcomes out of these events. And I guess I go to making sure that the existing parking that is free is utilised. So as you'd be aware, only about 500 of those 900 that were available were used on the day. We do, of course, need to manage risk to underground infrastructure and also that of our infrastructure being our levies. We also need to continue to make sure that we are providing fair and equitable access to those businesses along Invermay Road and Invermay area who are continuing to trade through game time. And I think importantly, we want to make sure we have a safe and enjoyable experience for those people who are coming into the city to enjoy the game. So we're working closely with our communications team at the moment to make sure we're improving our communication to community to raise awareness of what those parking expectations might look like. So clearly we want to encourage people, and we'll continue to promote access to the northern ingress car park to utilise those spots. We will be talking about some of the restrictions that will be in place at the half circle car park and on Lindsay Street around the levee. We will have some increased signage encouraging people, informing and educating people around where they should be going to park safely. And we'll increase our social media and other promotional platforms to continue to spread that message.
Great, thanks, General Manager. Question from Councillor Kai.
I was just wondering, instead of, well, it's still a good idea to send out all the media platforms and signage and all that, but the people who purchase the tickets to go to the football, is there any way of, when they get their ticket, to come with an information or a diagram showing them where they can or where they can't park, because they are potentially the people that's going to be having this parking problem, not the other, 80% of the community who's not going to the football. So I'm thinking if we aim and address this parking issue to the people who have purchased the tickets, then that might make it a little bit easier.
General Manager Dan, question about potentially working with the Hawks and their member database around that.
Yes, and I'm not familiar with the ticketing system and what mechanisms that might have that would support that, but we can certainly have those conversations to see if there is a way that we can, enable those communications to go further with those people who are purchasing tickets.
Thank you.
The next question comes from Councillor Dr. Raze.
To follow on that, this is like it's going to be a continuous problem. Especially, we've been lucky we had only 11,000 this time. In the future, we might expect 20,000. So I think, why don't we have long strategic thinkings about to solve this problem? Because a considerable number of fans are not from Launceston, coming from the south and the northwest. Would we be able to look at possibility, have a parking area outside at the periphery of Launceston where they can park, and then they have buses park and ride? For example, we have Silverton, for example, nice big parking space, whether they can use it and then buses can transport them to the city.
I guess there's all sorts of options that can be reviewed as part of that, Councillor Rosé. I think probably the most strategic thing we've got in place at the moment is development of that Northern Ingress car park, which does give us great capacity, in fact, double what's been utilised over the last 2 games. So I guess primarily our goal will be to get that used and filled, but get contact around what are the other approaches we can take, and I think engagement with Hawthorn and similar event organisers to look at some alternative options, that would be a good suggestion.
Thank you. Councillor Harris.
Sorry to keep picking on everyone. Just thinking about it when I went to the football, not the last game I wasn't able to go, there isn't anywhere to securely park your push bike when you go to the football, but yet it's a very good way of beating the crowds and in fact reducing. So is it possible to see where there are in fact bike parking facilities in that general area, and perhaps for that to be advised, and whether in fact the UTAS Stadium precinct as it is actually has any bike storage facilities, because I can't think of any. I'll take it on notice though.
Thank you.
Any other questions about parking at the football? Councillor Pentridge.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Look, one of the disappointing things, and I hear little bits and pieces of it all the time, we always seem to have the reasons why it's someone else's problem. All right, I just mentioned, I can understand with Dan. I mean, we recently had an issue with, we were looking at disposing of York Park because of a $3 million shortfall. I approached certain people and asked to buy a big group of tickets, and at $350 to $400 a ticket, which I was very surprised. And the same thing's happening all the time. I mean, shouldn't we as a council take ownership of some of these problems? And as George rightfully said, and I think Councillor Harris, like we want the stadium, we want the games, then why don't we accept responsibility for the parking? And as someone rightfully said, a lot of people come from out of town, right? So it's got to be addressed. So we can't blame Hawthorn. We've done the deal with them. They're not about to change it and charge them or cost themselves money. Surely we as a community, if they're going to come to our town, service our restaurants, service our facilities, stay in our accommodation, maybe we've somewhere got to find a way of addressing it. And there is other options. Right? So
Great.
thank you.
CEO.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. So, I mean, the council has got existing arrangements in place with the Northern Car Park, so it's leased to university during the week. We've got access to that anytime there's a special event on UTAS Stadium. So those 900 car parks are available for the use of UTAS patrons. They're barely being half used at the moment, so there's sufficient capacity to deal with the problem that we have. We just need to educate people to use that space that's available.
Thank you. Thanks, CEO. And what I hear is that Dan's department will build on the wonderful efforts that they've done already ahead of the next game. Great. Any further questions? Sorry? Oh, yes, it's not football specific. Yep. Councillor Kai.
I was sent a question today earlier this week. I just wanted to know, when someone wants me to ask a question, should I ask it at public question time or? No, it is this right. Okay. So the question I was sent was that at Legacy Park in Hobart, the council operates 2 wood-fired ovens, and every second Sunday they host free community bake days. And the question is, I was wondering whether Launceston City Council has ever considered anything like this.
We might take that on notice for Dan and Shane's department to be able to work together to respond to.
But this is the right time? Yeah.
Great. I mean, if you want the answer in the meeting, it's always good to forward it on ahead of time, but failing that, it'll be provided, in the next agenda. Yep. Okay. Let's move on to item 13, committee reports. 13.1, Homelessness Advisory Committee meeting of the 23rd of January. The council receives the report. Moved, Councillor Walker. Seconded, Councillor Raze. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, that we received the report. It was listed there quite a few things that the committee has been working on. The committee is working at a high level between the multitude of organisations across Launceston that are involved, as well as community members, and there'll be an item shortly in regards to a new community member with the committee. But those key discussions are around the current action items of the regular connection between council and the organisations, updating documentation, detailing the services that are available to the homeless people, and certainly a way that we can communicate, because we're dealing with confidential information that services hold, that individuals don't wish to share, the way forward that we can communicate and that the council can operate without sort of, putting that under threat. And there are a number of options briefly discussed there that just show that it's important to bear in mind that when we talk about people who are homeless, we tend to lump it in together as one problem. The causes are complex and many. The outcomes are different. Privacy issues, of course, vary wildly for any group in society. So these are some of the sensitivities that the committee is working through and are progressing, and also with obvious consultation with obviously the Tasmanian Police and council, getting to that point where we fully understand and embrace our role in the situation in terms of what we don't do as much as what we do, in how we allow people the dignity of what they are doing at the moment, and only intervene and assist intervention where it's absolutely necessary. So there's some of the complex discussions that are going on. We know that we have to progress further and faster, and to that end, there are discussions taking place as to how we do gather data that we can use, not just to advocate on behalf of people who don't have housing, but also how we can provide services ourselves. Thank you, Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Walker, and thanks for your work together with Councillor Raze there. Councillor Raze.
Thank you. I feel privileged actually to be part of this committee. There are more than 20 people representing different organisations and groups, including recently also the police and social housing. And it gives us a really great pleasure to see all of them working together, and the Launceston City Council work as a facilitator between all these different groups. Just to tell you that how it was important or encouraging to hear from them a report how there have been regular mental health services started recently, and the social housing revealed that more new houses had been just built. Just remind you as well, before last Christmas, how there were tents along opposite the silos. Now you don't see the tent, but they are caravan, but at least they are protected. So I feel we are doing actually great things. Just the number of people in the organization just show you how many people are really working hard to try to help our homeless people. And credit to the Launceston Council as well, that they have produced a protocol for the homeless people in public and shared spaces. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Councillor Dr. Raze. Any other contributions for 13.1? Councillor Walker, do you wish to close?
Thank you. I do. Just in closing, to mention the work that our council officers do because, of course, with homelessness, there can be occasion where our council officers are called in to assist. It might be, removing rubbish. It might be to assist because of flood and weather conditions and moving people's property, or just being aware and checking that people are in a safe position. But yeah, just to mention the work that that management of rubbish and campsites that's being done by Launceston officers, and the cleaning crews, and hopefully at a future meeting we could hear directly from them as well to some of the things that they are dealing with in that process. But thank you to them. Thank you, Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Walker. Let's put the motion to the vote. All those in favour raise their hand. That's all councillors present. The committee report is carried. 13.2, Heritage Advisory Committee meetings held on the 15th of Feb and the 15th of March. Someone to move? Thank you, Councillor Kai. Seconder, Councillor McMahon. Councillor Kai.
So we've covered quite a few items in our first Heritage Advisory Committee meeting for 2023, including saying farewell to 2 long-serving members and welcoming 3 new community representatives. A couple of current issues that members of the committee felt very strongly about were, firstly, acquisition of the Patterson Barracks, which Councillor Walker has addressed, and we thank him for moving that motion, which we believe will provide a very positive outcome for Launceston and ensuring this important built heritage is remained for the benefit of the community. Secondly, in regards to item number 3 from the 15th of March report, the Heritage List Review, the committee noted that it will be important for council planners to have access to training to assist in dealing with additional workloads resulting from the review. And since the meeting, we have been informed that council officers are in the process of investigating this recommendation. We hope this training can commence very soon, as we will need specific expertise to adequately respond to inquiries resulting from letters sent to property owners regarding proposed and amended local heritage place listings, as well as the implementation of those changes to the planning scheme and the ongoing management of all of our valued heritage places. This review has been a huge undertaking over many years, with this stage resulting in data sheets being sent to over 1,000 property owners, with 780 of these being for new heritage listings. So without a doubt, there will be plenty of questions surrounding this. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank council officers and their consultants for their hard work in putting this together, and also councillors, especially Councillor Mackenzie and Councillor Walker, and the whole Heritage Advisory Committee for their support over the years to get the review to this stage. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Councillor Kai. Councillor McMahon. Councillor Mackenzie.
Thanks for the report. I just wanted to counter, and I appreciate the comments in regards to the Patterson Street Barracks, but I think we just need to be mindful of our language. We haven't actually agreed to buy anything at this point in time, and it's not for sale. So we just need to be mindful that it's something we look at, but I don't want community expectation to think that we've already bought it, because I think that's a dangerous thing for us to have.
Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. As Councillor Dawkins departs temporarily. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Joe. I was going to bring that point up too. It's early days yet, but I do thank the Heritage Committee for that voice of support there. They can see the obvious need in a town with a long heritage, built heritage such as Launceston, the amount of heritage groups there are, whether it is genealogy societies and history societies and things like that, the historical literature that we have, that Launceston itself has in our Queen Victoria Museum, a huge plethora of documentation regarding our built heritage. I think anything built in Launceston after that 1870 is well detailed and documented documented in those records. So yeah, look, the uses could be many and varied, but we're a long way away from that. But certainly I'd also like to talk about that heritage list review. And of course there should be concerns and questions from people when they get a letter saying that your house has been chosen. Lucky you, potentially going to go on a heritage list. I got one of those letters. I suppose, I would encourage people to now ask those questions. They might have no idea that their house has some value in terms of heritage, or they may very well know that. But regardless of what side of that equation they find themselves on, they do know that they live in a town that has a rich built heritage, greater than any regional city in Australia, I would posit. Yes, you have regional Victorian cities that have beautiful streetscapes and intact vistas, but nothing to compare to Launceston, I would argue. It's one of the great advantages that we have in this town. It is a reason that people are attracted to this city, and it should be a reason why people would wish to enhance and protect that. Now, having your house listed is not a major imposition. It is not something that people should be concerned about, but they need to be reassured of that too. And as a council, we need to also find ways to support and encourage and educate people about how they can still make modifications to their house, extend their house, but at the same time also protect the heritage fabric within that house, as people have done throughout the history of Launceston. So that's nothing new. But it was interesting to see a social media reaction, I suppose you'd say, to this heritage listing, which is understandable. People saying, oh, I don't know what this means, or I don't want my house listed. It's my house. I should have a say as to whether it's listed or not. Well, our built heritage is our collective heritage, and we share that. We all appreciate it. Visitors who come to this city appreciate it. And yes, of course, you own the house, but you own the house in a rich heritage city. And we should work very hard towards encouraging people to help celebrate that. Yeah, I would encourage that in every step of the way. That's all. Thank you, Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Walker. Councillor Dawkins is back in the room. Anyone else wishing to make a contribution? Councillor Kai, anything further? Let's put the motion to the vote. All those in favour raise their hand. That motion is carried unanimously. Thank you. We move to 14, Creative Arts and Cultural Services Network. 14.1, the report from October through until December 2022. Someone to move. Councillor Mackenzie, a seconder. Councillor Walker. Councillor Mackenzie.
I do, and I hope everybody's had a chance to read this. It's actually a good, short report and to the point. And how good was the report as well, expressing the uplift in attendance at the museum and the art gallery over the period of time, 126%. Now, we may be coming off a low base, but the reality of it is it's trending in the right direction. So my congratulations go to the General Manager and the staff out there for what they're putting on. I think certainly the artsies show that we can kick it with the rest of them in the world. And I think that just gives us that level of confidence now to where we go to next, I think. But that's not the only thing. It's sort of lots of other things have sprung off that. And I think if you read through the report, you'll pick up the shop was selling big stuff, which is good. Probably lots of Archie reports, but it certainly improved the retail side of it. But I think the fact that the QV Mag's name and everything is out there and building is really important to us. So if you haven't had a chance to read the report, I just welcome everybody to go through and have a look at and see the sort of different changes. And I just think the report's pretty good.
Thanks, Councillor Mackenzie. Seconder, Councillor Walker.
Thank you. And yeah, certainly that Archibald Prize exhibition was something special. People came from all over the state for that. It was a blockbuster, I suppose you'd call it, sporting parlance. But I've recently also, seen the list of activities projected out until mid next year with QV Mag, and just the amount of exciting, engaging, innovative out of the ordinary ideas, events, exhibitions and concepts that are coming our way, we should all be really justifiably excited about this whole city, because it is that those metrics are going in the right direction, that it is generating, of course, people, attendance, but also income, and that interest that is being generated across, the state now, and probably interstate as well. So, as Councillor Mackenzie says, sort of, mixing and matching with the best out there as far as the regional museum and gallery goes. Thank you, Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Walker. Any other contributions? Councillor Pentridge.
Once again, earlier on today we had a nice conversation about delegations, or we started it. There's a couple of dot points here in relationship to the museum, which I'm a little bit surprised about. One of them is that I've been made aware that the councillors are actually the governors of the museum. So we as aldermen, or councillors, I'm sorry, we are responsible for the museum. Is that correct? Was that being delegated away? Are we responsible as councillors for the museum? Are we the governors of it?
We are.
Good. Well, in my business, if someone give me a report 3 or 4 months down the road from when it was due, I'd be asking some serious questions. This report was supposed to be in December. Well, here it is now, April. We're nearly due for the next one, aren't we? But that's what these are the question notes we put. 3 months late. And then, do we all know that there's $225 billion worth of assets and artefacts in that museum? I mean, it's probably the biggest single asset that this council owns. And maybe without, it's been a long day, so I'll lighten up on this for several reasons, but we need to, are we aware of that? And maybe that's a conversation we need to have, and what more is expected of us as governors of the museum, and because I think it's a beautiful asset and we should look after it.
So just in terms of terminology, CEO, could you, in terms of the governors of the museum, could you just update us with that terminology?
Yeah, so you're not governors of the QV-MAG, you're the council who has statutory control of all elements of the council, including the QV-MAG. So, a governor is a term when it's in private hands, or when it's an entity that is not under local government control, but nonetheless you certainly do have strategic oversight of the museum.
Great. And we'll be sure to pass on, I'll ask the CEO to pass on to Shane, just to make sure that we're more timely communication. That's noted. Any other? Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Mayor. And I just rise to congratulate Shane and his team on a wonderful report. Just looking at some of these numbers in the summary there that he's given, or his team has given, visitor numbers to the art gallery, museum, all the inquiries, the media posts, the Facebook reach, the Instagram reach, the shop sales, everything has got plus next to it. In some cases almost doubled. So I just want to congratulate Shane and his team. I think they do an outstanding job for us in our city. And yeah, they should be congratulated. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Palmer. Any other contributions? Councillor Mackenzie, do you wish to close?
Just slightly, and I'm sure that all councillors did their due diligence and read the balance sheet would know there are $250 million worth of assets sitting there. But it's also, I think, poignant to note that the assets are actually under audit review and have got a rolling review period over 6 years. So we actually are spending a lot of time to ensure the veracity of the assets are there, which we've collected over hundreds of years and just added into there just to ensure that. So just to be aware that there is a lot of work being done to ensure our collection is being properly managed and collated.
Thank you. We'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour raise their hand. That is all councillors present. The motion is carried unanimously. Now to 15, Community and Place Network. 15.1, Homelessness Advisory Committee, appointment of community representative. that council appoints Oliver as a community representative on the Homelessness Advisory Committee until the 28th of July 2024. It's moved by Councillor Walker, a seconder, Councillor Britton. Councillor Walker, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Yeah, just briefly, Oliver has attended the last couple of meetings. Oliver did originally apply when the Homelessness Committee was established, was unfortunate to miss out, but since we've had a slight rearrangement there, we have been able to bring Oliver McDonald on to the committee, and they have made a valuable contribution already as someone who has some experience, a lived experience in this area, something that I've been fortunate not to have, but I value hearing from people who have had that lived experience. Yeah, we get, of course, the valuable contribution from our service providers and from our service organisations such as the police. But we also get, and we also get the contribution from our neighbouring councils, which is really good too, for this issue being such a pervasive issue, even though people are, when they're in need of services, attracted to a central business area like Launceston, but especially from our community members. In this case, they're bringing that valuable, sometimes lived experience, but otherwise just life experience to the committee. So I commend this to the table. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Councillor Britton, do you wish to speak? Does any Councillor Dawkins?
Thank you. Oliver has shown the power of persistence because they certainly applied first time round and weren't accepted, but second time round they were. I was fortunate to be Oliver's first employer. They work with me at Fresh. They are an exceptional human, a fantastic hard worker, and are a really, really fantastic contributor to public debate. So I wish them all the very best and hope you can all learn something from Oliver's life experience.
Hear, hear. Any other contributions as Councillor Harris departs the meeting? Councillor Walker, do you wish to close? Let's put the motion to the vote. All those in favour raise their hand. That is all councillors present. The motion is carried 11-0. To the Infrastructure and Assets Network we go. 16.1, petition response, Yorktown Regional Park. Recommendation is listed there in 2 points. Someone to move. Moved Councillor Mackenzie. Seconded Councillor Palmer. Councillor Mackenzie.
I do. I think it's worth, I think great the petition came. I think it gave us cause to consider what we do with our parks. And I think the response is appropriate in this particular case. And I think that point 2 of the recommendation, which says we review the level of service, in particular provision of public toilets for district parks, I think that's really probably the outcome of this petition, is really for us to have a review of it, because I think parks at different levels do and don't have toilets, but over time those parks and their use may change. And I think that's just a matter of keeping under a reasonable brief in regards to what those parks are being used for. And it may well be appropriate on a review of that those toilets are reconsidered at some future stage. I think it's an appropriate way of dealing with it.
Thanks, Councillor Mackenzie. Seconder, Councillor Palmer. Any councillor wish to speak? Councillor Walker.
Yes, just to say that reconsideration is important. I understand that council do, I believe, refer to some of these parks under different tiers, and tier 1, tier 2 type of thing. That might not be exactly true, don't quote me on it, but the idea that some have more prominence than others, and I think that is something that probably does shift with population shift, families, where young people are, that type of thing. This is a prominent park in an area that is at distance from other recreational areas, where it would be St Leonard's perhaps, or you do start to scratch your head and go, oh, Hollett Newstead, or you go Kings Meadows. Well, not really, So it's a significant area of land in a significant part of Launceston. So yeah, that response is appropriate, that we do reconsider and work towards there. And I encourage those people who signed that particular petition, and I'm sure, that they could have got a lot more if they wanted to. That we will take that on board and take it seriously and progress where appropriate. I've seen some amazing examples of these types of public facilities recently in a trip to Hobart. Having a couple of young children does mean regular stops at these types of facilities. And I'm not saying that we don't have great facilities here in Launceston, but I did see a few ideas where I thought, wow, there's new ideas out there all the time in this regard. So, yeah, thank you for bringing it to our attention.
Thank you. Councillor Walker. Any other contribution 16.1? Councillor Pentridge.
Mr Mayor, well, what I'm a little bit surprised about, and I was heading out that way today, other things happened. I'm just a little bit surprised that one of our officers has commented on these toilets and doesn't believe that anything really needs to be done. I was wondering whether the person responsible, Mr Everhart, why are 200 people plus feel that something needs to be done with these toilets, and one of our officers has decided that it doesn't?
They haven't decided. They've provided us with professional advice in line with our strategic plans and forward estimates. The ultimate decision's up for us to make. But
what was the people...
The rationale is listed there. But General Manager Eberhard, if you've got anything further with regard to the matrix of professional advice that has been arrived at.
We're genuine in that we need to review our public open space strategy, and Councillor Walker's right, there's different tiers, and we need to review what different facilities sit in different tiers, and therefore what services are provided, whether the toilets, playgrounds, whatever the services, sports facilities, whatever the services are, we need to review that. And what we're saying is that the best time to review that is strategically when we're reviewing the plan across all our facilities, not one facility in isolation.
And when do you feel that we might be looking at this?
As stated in the report and is in our annual plan, that's coming up over this next couple of years.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Any other contributions to 16.1? Councillor Mackenzie, do you wish to close? Let's put the motion to the vote. All those in favour raise their hand. That motion is carried. That brings us to the end of the meeting. Thank you for your support. As we close the meeting, I've just asked councillors to stay behind, please, for an additional item. Meeting closed at 3:51.